So a little background, again on myself. So I farm here with my brother-in-law. We farm about 8,000 acres of all types of crops, of which anywhere from 500 to 1,000 acres is put into grain, hemp grain and or hemp seed production. So a lot of what we'll talk about is through experience and kind of what we've learned over the past few years since I guess I started playing with the crop in about 1998. So there's much to learn yet, but we'll go through a few things that we've learned already, and hopefully we can sort of limit some of the issues that can arise from this crop. So growing hemp successfully, obviously you want to know what the market's demanding. Ashley will be a good person to talk about that, what we want to do. Obviously, again, is that you want to supply high quality hemp, and particularly on the food side of things, but not specific to food, whether it's fiber or CBD oil, all of this, everybody wants to supply the highest quality so that we can maximize our returns and really kind of keep people safe at the same time. So proper planning, I feel as an agronomist, agronomics plays a huge role. And then tips and tricks on harvest and storing practices is what we're going to try to go through kind of quickly today. So why grain hemp? For those that don't know, I'm assuming that most of the people on the Zoom meeting this morning already have an idea about the nutritional values of hemp grain. So I'm not going to get much into that, but this is one of the reasons why we're growing hemp for grain is just because of that strong nutritional value that we see. What to avoid in hulled hemp seed, and again, these are issues that when you look at a bag of hulled hemp parts, if any of these things are in that bag, then we should be aware of that. So yellow or brown meats, shell fragments, and unnecessarily large percentage of green flakes. And a lot of this starts at the grassroots level at the farmer's bin. So these are the things that the QA people like Ashley are looking for. And we want to make sure that we deliver them something that's going to make a great product for themselves and or any other processor on the hemp seed side of things. So really, I won't spend a lot of time here, but what I want to point out is that when we're dealing with the crop, we're dealing with raw hemp seed. Raw hemp seed, and you'll see for both the dehulled hemp seed and cold pressed oil, there's a cleaning process. Most processors will clean to at least a 99.95% purity. Then it goes into either a dehulling or crush. You don't see any sort of heat added or any major kill stop that's involved there. Each processor has a certain amount of variability, I guess, with regards to what they can do for a kill stop. But really the bottom line and what I wanted to get across on this slide is that it's raw hemp seed that is going to be put onto a consumer's plate. And so this is where we all need to do our job to ensure that the food is actually safe without any issues. And these are the microbiological limits that have sort of been set within Canada as taken as what we need to look for. Vanessa is going to be able to cover a lot of this and what it actually means, peroxide value, standard plate count, all of these scary words, salmonella, that we certainly do not want to have to deal with any recalls or having anybody get sick with this great nutritional food product that we have. So again, starts at the farm, and I just want to go through just a couple things prior to the harvest, soil properties, because you want to give your crop the utmost ability to compete with other weeds. So again, I mentioned cleaning to a 99.95% purity to maximize your return. You want to put hemp on a soil properties of moderately soil texture with a loamy texture. Basically what we're looking for here is the ability for the soil to absorb some moisture. Heavy clays should be avoided just due to the ponding of water. Sandy soils will work, but hemp will need anywhere from 11 to 12 inches of moisture to reach its most maximum potential with regards to grain production. So with sandy soils, a lot of times that comes with irrigation. non-saline. Really, hemp is a perfect example of a crop that if you think that you have a perfectly good field that without any impurities or any issues, just plant hemp on it, and it will certainly tell you where those problems are. We want to make sure that we fertilize properly too. So again, what we're trying to do here is establish a field where, where hemp is going to be very competitive with any sort of weeds. For those areas that are either organic or don't have the options for herbicides, your hemp crop is your weed control. And with that comes some good fertility. So again, won't spend a lot of time on this, but just as a comparison to canola, apologize for the kilograms and hectare, but the conversion is really about the same. So hemp will uptake about 200 pounds of nitrogen throughout the growing season. In comparison, canola takes 120. And what we mean by just focusing on the grain side of things, hemp will remove about 40 pounds of that nitrogen in the seed alone, whereas canola will remove about 65. So each crop has its own uptake formula, and this is just an example of some of the data that we've taken in Canada here some years ago, and it really hasn't changed a lot since then. Just to give you an idea, we are talking about broad acre application. This is our air seeder on the farm, applying anhydrous ammonia. The seed is going down through the Bourgault tank into these primary and secondary hoses, and it is just another crop that we seed, but when it comes time to harvesting, it kind of changes a little bit. One of the things to look out for with regards still to quality in hemp is the disease possibilities. And in this case, I wanted to just point out sclerotia or sclerotia bodies in Sclerotinia. So you can see that it affects the stem or the stalk of the plant. Essentially, you get this in the middle slide, this black, what is called a sclerotia body that is then deposited into the soil that creates the fungus that keeps the disease cycle going. Now, economically, particularly for us in the prairies, Sclerotinia, there are many crops that will host Sclerotinia, including our canola. Soybeans is another one that will be a host. But the issue is the sclerotia body when it comes to processing. If that sclerotia body that looks like a mouse turd on there happens to get its way through the cleaning process and finds its way into a hemp bag or bag of hemp hearts, not a very pretty sight. The immediate thing is the consumer thinks of a very bad thing. So for that reason alone, we need to look at different ways that we can combat the disease cycle, and really at this point in time, no fungicides are really labeled for hemp, but seeding dates and variety selection can help for that. Okay, so right into the grain harvest management. So timing of harvest is really one of the toughest things to sort of get your head wrapped around. The stalk and the field itself will still be quite green, and there's an advantage to harvesting at this 10 to 20% moisture. Now, dry is below 10% moisture. When we feel that we can store grain for a longer period of time, it has to be 10% or less. We actually recommend or suggest 9% or less. Harvest timing can go really from 10 to 20% moisture of the grain itself. You'll see in this picture that the bract material that is holding the seed opens up and the seed is just left open. So the first thing that you'll notice that I always say for timing of harvest is you're going to start to see the birds really start diving into your crop. They're going to start picking away at those seeds. The way hemp will mature is from the stalk outwards. So when 75% of these seeds are exposed and out, this is probably a little bit past that. I would say probably closer to 80, 90%, the picture that I'm showing. We're looking at that we're in that right time zone. At this point in time, we also are quite prone to wind and shattering, and those seeds will begin to start to drop. So it's really critical that timing of harvest, you kind of put everything else aside. And when hemp is ready to go, try to get it off at that period of time. Harvesting, I have harvested higher than 20%, but you really, really have a much tougher time having the separation within the combine. And you'll see that your sample is much more dirty You just can't put enough wind to move that biomass that isn't seed, get it floating so that you can actually start to run the seed over the sieve and the chaffer of the combine. Hemp is also very sensitive to cracking, so you have to make sure that you have adequate spacing for your concave, whether it's a rotary or conventional combine, and the speed of that concave and or rotor is the rotor or cylinder is quite important. Frost, I found, is not that much of a detriment, and actually could be a help to you. It's almost like a desiccant when it happens, as long as you don't have a sort of a killing frost. But a lot of these extra leaves, these what we're considered sugar leaves or leaves around the seed head, they can dry up after a frost. Within 2 days, you can go in there, and again, it just helps kind of clean up that sample. And then we went through sort of the percentage for. So this is the combine that I run. It is a rotary combine. We use a MacDon Draper header. One of the things that I just wanted to point out, as you'll see, on the left-hand side with the reel of the combine, we're always looking for areas of the combine that we know hemp was going to start to wrap or cause problems. And the reason that's important with regards to quality is that you want to maintain your concentration on harvesting that crop and doing a good job getting a good sample. You don't want to be bothered by having hemp wrapping around certain areas of the combine where you have to pull over and start cutting the fiber off there. That just prolongs the time that hemp is sitting in your combine, and nasty things can be happening. You want to try to be as efficient as possible and get the grain into an area, whether it's aeration or drying, as quickly as possible. So in this case, this reel, the fingers you'll see are all pointing up. At 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock, they're pointing down, then they flip up to the top. And it seems to be important for not being able to tangle. There are some reels that will have the fingers facing 6 o'clock all the way around, and that seems to have a bit more of a wrapping issue. So I don't sell MacDon Drapers, but I just know that this is one that does work well in hemp. Not to say that the others won't, but as you do more and more acres, those issues just seem to complicate over a period of time. These are kind of the initial settings. Of course, there is no hemp setting in a John Deere combine or any other combine for that matter at this point in time. But so what I set initial settings are for barley. I set my chaffer, which is the top one, at 16 millimeters. The bottom sieve is set at 6. My wind speed is anywhere from 870, even as high as up to 900 or 1,000, 950 to 1,000, so that you can actually get that cleaning. My rotor speed is running at about 470 RPM, and then my concave clearance is somewhere set in between wheat and peas, or canola in this case. So that's kind of your initial settings going in. Again, so the speed is moderate to low. My initial chaffer and setter and sieve settings are similar to wheat because the seed size is also similar. So just to give you an idea, it's your starting point, and of course you need to make sure and check things as you're running. This is the type of issue that I'm suggesting that we need to make sure that doesn't happen. This is just the drive shaft on the front of the combine. If this is happening, your thoughts are going to that. I'm building up hemp straw. I'm not concentrating on what the job I'm doing at hand. This is in the cleaning fan, another area that can be of issue. Simple techniques that you can use to combat that. So this is that same drive shaft with a PVC pipe. And some duct tape, and voila, as long as hemp doesn't have the ability to wrap on that, this kind of just flops around there or protects that. I don't have to worry about hemp wrapping on there. This is a beater, or a beater at the back end of the combine as the straw comes off the rotor. There's an issue with hemp wrapping around the shaft in there that can get into the bearing and causes some issues. Another simple cure is just taking some baler belting that on that rotor. You try to keep them all the same size to keep your beater in balance. It sweeps against the wall, and thus you don't seem to have that problem with wrapping. So little things with each combine you need to be aware of. We've got lots of that data and lots of help that can help farmers with each and every different combine. The one combine that we seem to try to keep out of hemp as much as possible is the claws. Just so happens to be the other two combines we run on our farm. So because of the straw walker system or the rotor system, there's two rotors that move the grain or move the straw that continues the thrashing motion to the back of the combine. When that's the case, a hemp stalk can't decide which rotor to go to. It kind of plugs up in the middle. So just be aware that there are certain machines that will run hemp a little bit easier. My father-in-law used to sell John Deere, so I kind of bleed green. That's the reason I went here, but red certainly works. Yellow, it's just a matter of what areas of that combine you need to look at. Always have some sort of fire suppression, because it seems that it's a matter of time before you will smell smoke if these things aren't looked after. This is a very important aspect when you're harvesting grain, is a proper grain moisture meter. You want to make sure that you're not trying to find a crop that is what you think is similar. Make sure that you have a machine that will calibrate towards hemp and hemp alone. An example of this is a 919 moisture meter that is the most popular in Canada. The calibration, though, and this is where it slips up a lot of people. For other crops, it's at, you can see it's sitting at about 53 here in the bottom right-hand corner. When you're calibrating for hemp, the calibration is at 73. And so a lot of times, a lot of farmers will be out at least 2 percentage points, which could mean disaster and or safe products. So always make sure, read the owner's manual, as they say. So that's quite important. Then when we actually get hemp from the combine into the truck, we generally, dependent upon the moisture, if we get into the low teens and or 12 to 13% moisture, I can fill a tandem at that point in time, put two hoppers in. That might take maybe 40 to 50 minutes to fill. I'm comfortable with that. And then the truck gets going to the bin. Any higher in moisture, you might only want to do one hopper at a time from the combine. We think that about 4 hours is the maximum amount of time you want grain without any aeration from the time that we start to harvest it. So keeping that in mind, then when you start, to make sure all your harvest equipment and handling equipment has been cleaned out thoroughly. Hemp food products are gluten-free. We don't want any residual wheat that's been hanging around that will cause problems on the cleaning side of things. Make sure your bins are cleaned out well. Try to eliminate as much as possible any opportunities for rodents or birds to come in there. Again, we're talking about a raw food product that we're handling. So just when you have that mindset, it kind of helps you kind of look into it a little bit more. For us, we have moisture cables within our bins, so we know what's going on with that grain right through the winter season. A lot of times, the processor can't take all the grain in at the same time, so you're going to have to store it for a period of time. It's a little bit of insurance and investing in moisture cables. So these are the type of bins, and again, this is in Canada where canola is kind of king, I guess. And so we've been lucky enough that a lot of this infrastructure is in place. So a hopper bottom bin with on the right side is an aeration fan. Each fan will have a certain horsepower, and the general rule of thumb is for every horsepower of fan that you have, you can put about 200 bushels of hemp grain in there that will keep it from spoiling. So making sure that air is on. If grain, whoops, sorry, no, wrong way. If we put hemp grain in the silos or bins at anything above 16%, we'll throw that fan on for a day. We'll completely remove all the material or all the grain out of that bin and then move it over to the next one. And the reason being that as we're drying grain, there's going to be a lot of bract material within there that has a higher moisture percentage. If as we fill the bin, that bract material really goes to the outside and along the walls of the bin, air will take the path of least resistance through the grain and not necessarily dry through there. So we want to make sure that all the complete bin doesn't have any hot spots in it, and we can dry. Once we get into that 12 or 13%, once that grain material has dried up, and as we're moving the bins, if there's a gentle breeze, a lot of that material just kind of flows off. So we're good to go. Grain dryers can certainly be used, but the rule of thumb again is low and slow. Do not toast your grain. Let your food processor, if there's a market for toasted hemp seed, let them do that. Don't do it, try to do it on the farm. So as another rule of thumb is have the plenum set for anywhere between 130 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Do not let that grain get anywhere above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't, again, once we get too high of heat, we start damaging that nutritional value within that seed or grain. So it can be done, just make sure that you go low and slow. So priority number one, factors for bacterial growth and mold that Vanessa is going to touch on. Time, temperature, moisture are your enemies. You have a known moisture. The temperature is your, whatever the temperature is that you're harvesting on that day. Time is the only one that you have control over. So make sure that you expedite the process as far as getting grain onto that aeration as quickly as possible, so that you can reduce or minimize your bacteria or mold load. So this is just a picture. Again, this is me harvesting last year. You can see the green tinge. This hemp happened to be about 13% moisture. You would never know it from the look of the crop. If you wait until it's dead dry, you're going to have a lot more of the issues with wrapping, potential fires within the combine. So take care in making sure timing is everything on this crop. And with that, I mean, the future is bright. This is another sunset just in going through the field. And with that, that's kind of all that I had to say. That you can get a hold of me if there's any questions or comments or ideas or thoughts about harvesting. I'm quite active with regards to answering messages and stuff, as opposed to this time of year, the phone calls get a little hectic. So if you can't get a hold of me, then please just send me a message.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk here this morning too. I'm going to kind of try to take it to the next step after harvest, which is a little wee but super important step that I call sampling. I'm actually Linden. I'm the director of quality at Manitoba Harvest Hemp Foods. We're the world's largest hemp food manufacturer. We've got a couple of sites up close to Jeff here in Manitoba. We've been doing this for about 24 years now, so I'd like to think we've really refined how to do it. I'm an open book if you ever need any tips. I'm certainly happy to share. And our farm ops team had me put a shameless plug in here. We actively purchase hemp grain or seed too. So I'd love to talk to you sometime if you're in there. Our business is really a seed to shelf model. We work close with growers all the way through to manufacturing of food that we distribute through all the common channels. But quality has really been how we've got there and how we stay there. Hemp, it's a healthy food. And with that, our consumers are really a little more knowledgeable than you might think. And so they really demand and scrutinize a lot heavier than they might another product. Our facility's got an international certification with a AA+ grade, which is as good as you can do, and we're really proud of that. So, but yeah, let me talk a bit about sampling. So right after harvest, grain sampling, seed sampling is what I'll be talking about. And the gist of it is all the testing, how much you'll get paid, whether you'll get your crop purchased, all depends on the sample. A good sample will get you a good result. A bad sample will get you a misleading result that might not get you what you need. So it's really important to take a representative sample of the grain to determine the true quality of the lot. I just made up a picture here of a hopper bottom bin, just kind of giving an example of how quality can be variable among that bin. Maybe how you harvested it has a section of foreign seed at the top, or maybe there's some eating going on, gives you a section of high microbiological activity in the middle. It's important to take a representative sample and not just open a gate and pull whatever is adjacent to figure out what you got there. Bad samples lead to just misleading results. They might inflate a quality issue, or they might miss one. And where you could have put some air on the bin, you might think you're fine and therefore skip it, and it grows into a larger problem. The other thing I really like about good samples and testing is you can really learn and refine your techniques. You get some good data, you can start to edit what you do year over year. All in understanding the true quality also allows you to come up with corrective actions. So I gave that example of aeration, or maybe a different cleaning that might be necessary for that lot to minimize your clean out actually, or sublotting to split a bin in case there's a pocket or a problem that you need to deal with. And what this all does is it ensures that any subsequent sampling that happens when it arrives at a facility like ours doesn't result in any rejections or surprises at that stage. Two main techniques for sampling grain: stream sampling or automatic inline sampling. Inline sampling's great if you got it set up that way, but most of us will be doing stream sampling when we're looking at moving seed from a truck into a bin. Just a bit of an eye chart here, but how to stream sample. So first off, make sure you got it written down and you've trained your team on what this procedure is. Most important part is to make sure the equipment you have is clean. All too often, you'll create a problem for yourself by using a dirty sampling tool that then creates a microbiological issue in your sample only that fools everybody along the line. But what you're going to be doing is just taking samples at regular intervals as the seed is unloading. Then you combine them all and mix it to make one large representative sample. Then you use tools like a riffle divider. Well, you use that to mix it, but you also use it to split it down into a sample that one you send off to the laboratory, which Vanessa will get into testing. The other you keep for yourself just in case we need to go at it again. But I think stream sampling is pretty straightforward. It's a real easy one to rush or to skip, or to say that one scoop's probably good enough for me, but you'll miss it and you'll fool yourself, and it can cause bigger issues. As far as sampling intensity goes, there's lots of different articles out there as far as what they weigh in on. We follow the Canadian Seeds Institute guidance here, and what it says is how many samples to take per volume. But the simplified version I look at there is a full Super B is about 42 metric tons, and so you're pulling about a sample every 2 minutes as it's unloaded. So that's quite a few samples if you've ever done stream sampling. I know lots of people probably do one, go and have a cigarette and then have another one. And so this is pretty active when you look at it this way. We time our bins and watch our team members do it there. So about every 2 minutes, you're pulling a sample. It yields a pretty big bucket full of seed that you're gonna have to split down. Different sampling points through the supply chain. So this is pretty common. It's certainly what we do in our organization. So 3 different samples. One at harvest going into a bin. Another one after it's been cleaned at a seed cleaners. And then another one when we receive it at our processing facility. Lots of times the testing's similar. But what I want you to just see here is, we're going to keep looking for the same thing. So it's in your best interest to find it up front and deal with it, rather than wait till the last minute for anybody to find a problem. And what this does is just make sure the quality of the product at the end of the day is guaranteed at that point. So just to summarize, follow a solid procedure, make that plan ahead of time right now. use clean tools and just take multiple primary samples. And just know that the next step, which Vanessa will get into, the laboratory testing, it's very controlled. So your results are really only as good as the sample that you send in. So spend some extra time and you'll get a true representation of what the quality is of the bin. So a quick crash course in sampling, but it's a very important step right after harvest to set you up for a win. Now, I think I'll hand it off to Vanessa to take us into testing.
All right, confirming you can see my slides. Great.
Yes.
Great, wonderful. So I'm Vanessa Snyder. I'm the Business Development Director for Eurofins. I specifically work with our hemp and CBD testing services and solutions. For those of you who might not be familiar with Eurofins, we are a global third-party laboratory network. So here in the US, with our US Foods Division, in terms of supporting hemp services, we, kind of like Ashley said, they do seed to shelf. We like to say we test soil to shelf, so we can really help with all analytical testing, chemistry, micro, and contaminants throughout the whole life cycle of hemp. So I'm going to spend the next couple minutes talking about why we test, what we should be testing for, and why this is so important. And I like to think of it in two parts. So first of all, you have your product quality, or the things you want to see in your product. So for hemp, we know protein, fatty acid profile, all the good nutrients in there. And then product safety, or the things we don't want to see in our product. So things like contaminants, harmful bacteria, mycotoxins. And why this is important is ultimately you need to protect your end user or your consumer. So making sure that they are getting that high quality product they are expecting, and making sure that it is safe and won't cause any harm from ingestion. And overall, it's really ultimately protecting your company and your brand. So to dive into product quality, there are some really quick, inexpensive tests you can run for just general quality markers, and that would be a protein, moisture, and crude fat test. So these will help ensure that the seed meets a general level of maturity, is making sure that it is sufficiently dry, to be stable from mold growth. And these tests will also help align with any labeling or specific claims you're making as a food product. So an additional test you could run is an ash test. So that way, when you're running the moisture, protein, fat, and ash, that really provides your whole proximate profile in order for you to then run a carbohydrate by difference, and again, just assist with your labeling. So one thing you do want to keep in mind that as a food, you do need to follow those general food safety requirements, and it does need to be labeled properly. To continue with product quality, we know that hemp seed oil is high in polyunsaturated fats, linoleic acid, and alpha-linolenic acid. So we know that alpha-linolenic acid is a super healthy fat, which is great, but these polyunsaturated fats are highly prone to oxidation. So rancidity is going to be your top concern when talking about product quality. So there's a couple things we can test for. One of these would be peroxide value, and that's really your best indicator of peroxide activity, which is the initiator of oxidative rancidity. One thing that is important to point out is peroxide value, or PV, is really a dynamic event. So it is important that you couple this with an additional quality marker, like aldehyde formation or pianisidine value in order to be able to truly track the stability across the shelf life of the product. And then lastly, free fatty acid is also an indicator of hydrolytic rancidity. So this is more of an initial indicator of quality from pressing conditions for the pure oil, but it's definitely worth mentioning as a quality attribute. And then I've also listed foreign matter here. Again, this is another primary indicator of harvest quality. So if you are marketing hemp grain, you would want to set a specification for that. ASTM is a great reference for you to look at as well. So moving over to the product safety side, again, these are all the nasty things that we don't want to see in our product. As we know, hemp is a phytoremediator. So we know that things like heavy metals and pesticides can bioaccumulate in the hemp. So you will want to test for pesticides, heavy metals, and mycotoxins. You also will need to test for your delta-9 THC content. As we know, cannabinoids aren't really inherently present in the seed, so we should not be seeing any of that in the product. And then I've also listed here allergens and microbiology. So with any grain testing, it would be important to adhere to a strict allergen control. So running a full risk assessment or verification testing on that would be important. And then in terms of the microbial growth, you want to check for the harmful bacteria. This would include things like E. coli, coliforms, Salmonella, Enterobacteriaceae, plate count, and then yeast and mold. So just as a reminder, FSMA, or the Food Safety Modernization Act, does require you perform a food safety risk assessment. So like Jeff and Ashley both mentioned, you know, having these procedures up front, checking things along the way is really going to be, you know, the best way for success, making sure that these, you know, harmful bacteria or mold, or checking your moisture content up front to ensure that it doesn't get to the final product or your marketed product is best. And then lastly, I just want to touch on some testing considerations as it pertains to the cannabinoid testing or potency testing for delta-9 THC. There are a lot of third-party laboratories out there running potency analysis. We do always recommend that you are utilizing a laboratory that is using a standardized method. We use the AOAC First Action Approved Potency Method, which was actually the Eurofins developed method. Although it was initially created for dry weight cannabis flower, additional validations were done and approval was given so it can be used on all parts of the plant. And then, as we've seen with different regulations set forth by ASTM, for example, or if you might be exporting to different countries, we are seeing that they're requiring that much lower level for delta-9 THC. So we have met and adapted that kind of industry standard or are meeting industry need. And we've developed an LCMS method to hit those low levels to get down to a 1 ppm LOQ for the cannabinoids, just really to show that, you know, those are not in the hemp seed or grain. That's all I had to share today. Again, thanks for your participation. Thanks HIA for having me. Feel free to reach out to me via email. I'm more than happy to address any questions as it might pertain to testing or questions about being more involved with HIA.
I can talk on this, but we'll maybe let Jeff also, or one talking about the difference between hemp grain and hemp seed. Are they entirely synonymous terms? So, and then distinction between hemp seed being 2 words and hemp seed being 1 word.
Andrea, you can probably address that one. It's been a pet peeve or a project of yours for many years. But in generally speaking, I just like to say, because I am in the seed business, when I say seed or when I hear seed, I want to put that in the ground to produce a plant that's going to produce the grain. And whether it's 1 word or 2 words, maybe you can.
Well, I think the nomenclature now going is hemp seed being 1 word, meaning grain, hemp seed being 2 words, meaning distinct separate words, meaning something that you plant. But definitely with Jeff, personally, I've moved my language to talking about grain and seed plant. Grain is something that is now outside of that pedigreed seed system and is deemed for further processing. But I'll say nomenclature when it comes to packaging, that's all over the board. You'll see hemp seed 1 word, hemp seed 2 words. So there's not been a unified stand, let's say, on what that nomenclature should be when it comes to what people are marketing their product as whether it's 1 word or 2 words. And different regulations, it's also written as 1 word or 2 words. Some regulations never even refer to the word grain.
Yeah.
So but the standard would be hemp grain, meaning this is outside of the pedigreed seed system and is now not going to be replanted or been run in that case. And then hemp seed, anytime that word seed is technically used when I'm verbally speaking, that's something that you plant. Michael, does that answer your question there? Hope so. If not, you can come back on that. Let's see here. Seed goes, okay, we have a few questions there. What is, from Ian Russo, what is the percentage moisture for subsequent seed germination or viability?
It's a good question, Ethan. Generally speaking, it's the same, what we're trying to do as we're storing seed is making sure that it remains at the highest quality as possible. So that 9% is still there. Where we're finding there's difficulties is a fluctuation in temperatures, where if we store seed in a Quonset that sort of maybe there's high humidity and or excessive temperatures, again over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, we're going to start to see a degradation of that hemp germination. Typically, even in Canada, where we're storing grain in a frozen state over the winter, we might see a 1% to 2% drop of germination from year to year. And it's really, again, dependent upon making sure that we harvest properly, don't crack the seed. That's going to affect your germination. There's a number of other different variables that will do that. But to answer the question, the best percent moisture remains keeping it dry, cool, is your best methodology, I guess, for maintaining high germ and vigor.
Thank you.
Well,
Feeding into that question, unless Ian, you had anything else you wanted to add? No. I guess feeding into that question, when farmers are looking to purchase planting seed, what kind of germination should they be looking for? And what paperwork should they be looking for to accompany that?
yeah, on each bag tag, there should be the most recent germination legally for AOSCA certified seed. That germination test has to be taken within 6 months for it to be valid. Certified number 1 hemp seed has a germination of 85% and higher. And number 2 would be anywhere from 75% to 85%. So that the bag tag should tell you, where the seed was grown, any other impurities within there from the test, germination. What else is on there? It's usually the lot code. So again, as a seed producer, you can figure out where that seed came from, what farm, etc. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Required to save those tags?
In Canada, you are, or you should be, particularly if it's certified seed. So there's two separate tags. There's your AOSCA certification tag, and the tag color will tell you what pedigree it's at. So a blue tag means certified. If it's a purple tag, it's a registered lot. If it's a white tag, it's a breeder lot. So most of the seeds sold commercially to a farmer will be of certified status. If ever, yeah, you should hang on to those, whether it's whether it's Health Canada, if they do an audit, or anybody else, they're going to want to know that that seed was purchased through the certification process. And so it is, you keep them for at least the growing season, and in case of anything that might call for needing them. But I certainly try to keep them for at least that long.
Mhm. And so maybe I'll toggle one over for Ashley. Does anybody else have any questions that they would like to unmute themselves and ask directly to any one of the presenters? Okay. Ashley, what's being done on the side for standards when it comes to talking about, what the spec should be for a particular product? Let's just take aerobic plate count for an example. We can see that it's much lower in the grain sample that Jeff had presented. What are you seeing when it comes to the food side, and what's happening in the background to maybe bring forward some unilateral specifications, so no matter where you're purchasing from, you're going to get the same kind of spec of a product?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good question. There's work been going on in Canada with CHTA and ASTM to publish specs. It's a straightforward question, but it is a tough one to answer, because ultimately it depends what we're going to do with it next. If I'm going to, turn it into a hemp milk, which pasteurizes it, I don't really care about SPC anymore. But if I'm going to put it into a raw hemp part that people consume with minimal, treatment, then I do. So it really depends on your processor. But I think as a place to start, we're publishing some publicly available specs with ASTM there. But things have evolved over the last few years too, with people like ourselves. We've installed a pasteurization unit, which changes suddenly what we can tolerate and can't. But yeah, I look to ASTM. I think they're publishing a bunch.
That's so good, in the work that the CHTA has been doing for many years and continue to do to bring the processors, farmers, members to the table to have this discussion, to be able to bring this forward. And then hopefully that will, carry forward internationally and become something that's more readily acceptable, even at a baseline, even though internally you may, as Ashley was saying, need to change those specifications for your finished product. But having a general safe range that we all know that if you're going to purchase this product, you're going to be within this tolerable limit for food safety, which is highly important. I feel, Ashley, I know you can comment on this, is that I think we underestimate the amount of work that goes in on the quality assurance once it comes into the processing facility, the number of tests that have to be done, how frequently they need to be done, and the tracking that has to happen within the food manufacturers now, especially as hemp is becoming, let's say, more mainstream. So what as hemp becomes more mainstream as a food, what do you see companies asking for?
Well, I think, more mainstream in that, maybe people are willing to use it as an ingredient in their product. Mm-hmm. And then you get the bigger guys like the PepsiCos of the world that are entertaining it. And so they've got pretty tight standards. They'll be looking at lots of what Vanessa presented, like heavy metals, obscure tests like that we don't talk about as much. Like we talk about micro and physical purity a lot, but heavy metals and stuff that matters where it was grown will all of a sudden come into the vocabulary. I think with CBD coming online and suddenly some more varieties being out there, people are now back to talking about THC testing and cannabinoid content to make sure we are still distinguishing the low THC from the high CBD products. So there's a few more tests like that have always been there, but now are maybe getting asked for a lot more than they used to.
Mm-hmm. And maybe that would be a great opportunity to toggle over to Vanessa to talk about these different cannabinoids, because we know that in different parts of the world, the regulations are different. So if somebody comes to me and they say, oh, what's the THC? That doesn't really mean anything to me, especially because of the fact that the regulations are variant, whether or not you're talking about total THC equivalent. So maybe Vanessa, if you want to talk a little bit about what you all are seeing and how those things are being interpreted.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a challenge when you look at the state by state regulations, let alone internationally, what some countries are requiring. Like I mentioned, some of the difficulty is with those initial standardized methods, they weren't able to detect the delta 9 THC to a low enough level that some countries or organizations are requiring. So really, not only does the methodology need to keep up, but when you're testing cannabinoids in different products, whether it be, a hemp hull or a hemp protein powder or something in a completely finished product like a baked good, you also need to have your method be validated for that matrix. So there's a lot of intricacies as it comes to the actual testing. There might be variability between methods that are being run, variability between third-party testing labs. So yeah, there's a lot to consider with the cannabinoids piece.
We definitely find that, going into Europe, it's the total THC. They'll accept the total THC equivalent. So that's also some things to bear in mind. If you look at other markets that are now really have set the limits for CBD. So also working with your lab to make sure that you know what test you need, and so that they can run and be able to produce those analytical reports as needed. Jeff?
Just looking at the chat, and there's a very good question that came out, and who's responsible for such testing? And I don't know. I guess each company will have their own requirements. Primarily in Canada, it's the responsibility of or has been the responsibility of the purchasing company to pay for those tests. So it is costly. By the time you're done, it runs well over $1,000. By the time all 3 tests are done. The seed cleaning aspect is usually the responsibility, as far as financially, for the grower. And it just sort of triggered me to make sure that seed cleaning is also a process that we didn't really touch on, but the ability of that seed cleaner to handle the grain in the same manner that we expect everybody else to is very important. And so making sure that the seed cleaner is well aware of how to handle hemp properly, not to maybe use a rotary screen or certain whether it's a pneumatic system that moves the grain or too many augers that are too narrow, like a pencil auger, can have a huge detriment to the quality of that grain. So right through the supply chain and right through the handling system, we got to make sure that everybody is on board and is knowledgeable in that fact. So it just triggered me to throw that point in also.
I would also add to that question, as mentioned, we assist with testing across the whole life cycle. So from the grower to the processor to the brand owner. And we've seen where testing is done and paid for by the processor, but you need to remember that as a brand owner, if you are the one, labeling and selling that product, if there is something wrong with it or it, does cause harm, that's you're on the line and your brand is on the line for that. So really knowing your whole supply chain, trusting your suppliers, trusting who they're testing with is really important.
Sorry, go ahead, Ashley.
I could maybe layer onto that too, just from the processor lens. At the raw seed stand angle there, we're pulling samples from, say, 100,000 pound lot. But when it gets through my facility, our lots are 2,000 pounds each. So if there's a problem, it's a needle in a haystack in the bin. But when it gets to processing, the haystack's not very big anymore. So I'm going to find anything that needs to be found at that stage. So, I'm interested in testing well up front so that we don't find those surprises later on. But there's a lot of testing throughout each step. But we found kind of if you start early, you'll set yourself up for a win later on.
And another thing to feed into that is going to point that Vanessa was making about the brand. Make sure if you are purchasing that you as the brand or the co-packer are having your own retention samples, because that's your safe house also. So I've run into this situation where, yes, this is being recorded, where we, a company has not, they've got the product's gone onto the shelf, but they did not retain a retention sample. for maybe it was a blended product, and this was for all products, not just hemp in general. And then they couldn't isolate what the problem was because them themselves did not hold their own retention sample. So that quality assurance has to definitely carry on. Question that's come up is talk about the value of the seed THC compliance testing burden off to the growers. Even here, not all THC testing is on the burden of the contractor. So as part of Health Canada's regulations, the farmers are responsible for having their crops tested. Depending on what the contract looks like with that grower, whether or not they do or do not have a contract, they themselves may take on the burden of those costs. But then once the product comes into the facility, those come forward for the processor to take care of. So the additional, maybe the additional heavy metal, or the after the cleaning, or depending on how your processor is testing. So some will test from the bin, then they'll test once it's clean. Those tests all fall again back on the processor. So, but I can say for THC, sometimes that one is the responsibility of the farmer to conduct that test as part of their reporting back.
In Canada now, they've relieved that cost to the producer, and it is only at the pedigree level. So as a seed grower, I need to have that field tested, and essentially that same seed lot, the parentage is tested either 3 to 4 years throughout its life cycle. So breeder seed is tested, that seed is used to plant to produce registered or foundation seed, that lot is tested. When it gets to in the farmer's hands as a certified, we have a pretty strong indication, as long as they're following the AOSCA regulations with regards to isolation from other hemp varieties, then essentially Health Canada said, well, we're quite confident that that seed will remain under that 0.3%. So the farmer does not have to take, a commercial farmer doesn't have to take the THC test in the field, which is fantastic. The other thing, I guess, just to point out, I'm not sure how long we have actually for time, but there is another option. Once if Ashley or Andrea or somebody rejects your grain for food production, there is a secondary product that you can be sell it for bird seed. Currently, there's the odd as we move forward with getting hemp more into the mainstream as far as livestock feed, we'll have more options, but there is a birdseed market. There are some additional markets that can be utilized, but they are not as lucrative as the food grain market. So one of the biggest questions I get a lot from the US is on the dual purpose side of things too, where they might be trying to harvest for fiber. There's some seed that's still in the stock. The crop is knocked down into a windrow and then put into a bale. I get a lot of questions saying, well, I can sell that seed that I extract once I start to decorticate that bale into the food side of things. And that's a definite no, because obviously that's not the best environment to be holding onto that seed. So yeah, those are just some of the things that as we move, seems to me we're moving more as a dual purpose, whether it is for grain and cannabinoid, or fiber and cannabinoid, or grain and fiber. Like there's a lot of different things. Concentrate on your main revenue stream and do a hell of a job getting a good quality from that, and then take it after that. So just my 2 cents.
Right, I will toggle this back over to Jody.
Yeah, so thank you very much for everybody. Again, we're just past time, so we're gonna go ahead and wrap things up. Mike, did you want to say a final parting word before we jump off? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and send that by email. Thanks so much, everybody, for your time. Vanessa, Ashley, Jeff, Mike, Andrea, for your help, all of the guests with your wonderful, insightful questions. We appreciate your being a part of this experience. Look for the follow-up email to come within a couple of days here.
Thanks, Jody, Vanessa, Jeff.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.